Hi, I'm Adrian Aguirre. I'm an artist living here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm originally from Juarez, um, but I did get my degree here many years ago at New Mexico State University in graphic design. Then later on, I got an MFA in painting at the University of North Texas. While today I'm mostly going to focus on my fine artwork, I just want to mention that I also work in digital media, and I work at the Learning Games Lab at New Mexico State University. We make educational games and animations, and if you haven't heard of us, just want to encourage you to go check us out. We have some good stuff for kids and for adults, some games, some math games, such as these examples here on the right. And you can look us up at learninggameslab.org or at innovativemedia.nmsu.edu. And for my personal fine artwork, I do have a portfolio website, and it's adrianaguirre.com. And there's a screenshot of my website here on the left. I also have an Instagram, which I try my best to keep up with. And it's adrian.aguirre.art. Also, this piece right here, I recently installed at Mesa Lands, at the Mesa Lands Community College in Tucumcari. And I was honored to have been selected by the New Mexico Purchase Award. I've been living here in Las Cruces for the past 5 years. After college, I moved to Philadelphia for a few years, and then came back here to settle back down in Las Cruces. So these two pictures here are from our studio. I share the studio with my wife, so she takes one side of the wall and I take the other. As you can see, my wife Zoe, she's a terrific painter, but her work is very different than mine. Her work is very colorful, geometric, and my work tends to be less colorful and figurative. We do have 2 young kids, so we rarely are able to work in the studio at the same time. But I do enjoy seeing her work, as it makes me think about things that I don't normally think about, such as color, composition, paint surface, and all those things in my own work. So my wife and I have also done quite a few murals together. Some are here in Las Cruces, others in El Paso, and a few others in Philadelphia. This was one of our most recent murals, and this was at the El Paso Refugee Center, and which we were very, very happy to be a part of. So in my personal work, I see art as a way to communicate ideas, and in my case, as a way to discuss political topics in a way that maybe isn't seen elsewhere. So here's a painting that I created as an undergraduate. It was around the time that the Iraq War started, and I started to think about different ways to discuss war, militarism, and then see it from the eyes of children. And then here's another example. This is a series that I did of Latin American politicians and strongmen. So I think in all the series that I've done, I am concerned about what I'd like the viewer to think about when they look at my drawings, paintings. So maybe, as in this example, it's the absurdity and narcissism of political campaigns. So you see the big face of the politician here in the back, and then some strange character on the right. There's also an image of Christ here. So there's a lot of different things that are happening. Praying to your politician as a savior. So there's little things that I try to add into my paintings and drawings. Much of my work now is focused on immigration, and it's because it's a topic that is very personal to me. I'm an immigrant. My mother, my brothers, my whole family. In these pieces, I use portraiture as a way to remind viewers that immigration isn't just an abstract idea. Immigration policy, deportation, is going to affect real people. Families will be separated. So these portraits are of people that I've met and talked to. They were either working here in the U.S. or had been deported back to Mexico. My process usually begins with a photographic reference, but I also like sketching on site as a way to connect myself to the place and the people that I later work on in the studio. So here on the left is a photograph, and I'm drawing a sketch, a portrait of a refugee from Tijuana. These other two are other examples that I've made of day laborers. Once I have a photographic reference, I'll then take it back to my studio. I'll print it out, and then I'll take a sketchbook and I'll draw little thumbnails. These thumbnails help me figure out composition. I can also test whether, sometimes things work on a photograph that don't work in a drawing. So this is where I started to test that out. It also, if there's things that don't work, I can then play with them in the drawing and change them before I take them to the larger piece. So here you can see a picture of my sketchbook, and I had several little thumbnails. And here in a small space, I started to create a thumbnail for the finished piece here on the right. So once I have a composition that I like, I'll take it. I'll sometimes take it to Photoshop and set up a grid, or I'll print out the picture and then draw it directly on it, so that I have a grid to work with. And I like using a grid because it helps me to quickly set up proportions and composition on the big piece. But I'm also able to kind of draw large gestural drawings that maybe if I was using a projector, it would be so stringent that I wouldn't be able to do. I like creating interesting gestural marks. I'm not always successful at it, but I love it when a drawing comes together and it looks like it was just easily done with just a few marks that were placed just right. And here's an example that I think here's a good example of that, which I think is very gestural, it's very quick, but things start to work together to create the illusion of form. I also like to be able to erase my marks, and I do this in digital media, and I do it often, actually. I'll draw something in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then I can always Control-Z to undo. But the same is true when it comes to traditional media. So I tend to gravitate towards media that are forgiving, such as charcoal, oil, graphite, and gouache. And I tend to stay away from things like watercolor or ink because I like to be able to erase my mistakes. So the majority of my work now is in charcoal, but back in college, I had mostly done oil paintings. And here are some early examples, and I shrunk them down, but these were large, very large pieces. And the reason for not using charcoal in finished pieces is because I had always thought about of charcoal as a way to learn how to draw. I used it to draw still lifes or to draw the figure, and I never really saw it as a way to make a finished piece. So it was only when I got into graduate school that I discovered that drawing could be a way to make complete works of art. And often I found that people liked the way I drew, and sometimes would respond more strongly to a drawing than to a painting. I also started to experiment with expressive marks, and maybe only fully rendering certain areas that I felt were important. So like here, for example, I left a big area unfinished, and I started to use some of these expressive marks to emphasize movement and distress, tension. The same in this drawing on the left. So I often would leave a blank background, or leave blended marks, and then just focus on rendering eyes, hands, or things that I feel are important to get the message across. I also discovered that leaving certain things unfinished could be meaningful, such as this blank piece of paper. And I made a series of these portraits with day laborers holding blank pieces of paper, and I felt like that could become symbolic of a lack of documentation. And then to contrast that with a fully rendered face, I could then maybe begin to question the idea that a piece of paper should determine someone's rights. And then another example here is this piece where I tried to make the background a little bit darker in value than the sheet of paper that the figure holds. And this is just to add a little bit more significance, as it almost appears to be glowing inside the figure. Other than portraiture, I like to work with multiple figures, and then figure out how to create a narrative from how each figure relates to one another. Here the narrative is somewhat clear, as there seems to be a truck that has stopped, and the day laborers are rushing to see if they can find a job for that day. I feel like when I group the figures, the pose is very important. So I really pay attention to the subtleties of each pose, to make sure that the body language is communicated, so that even when the figures don't seem to be facing each other, there seems to be kind of like a story that connects them all, and that way maybe the viewer can create their own story, or it almost feels like they could be part of that story. I also really like to use gouache, and I use it in combination with charcoal, and it's a way to add color and emphasis to my drawings. It's very forgiving. It does take some work to get used to the medium, because it doesn't work like oil, but it seems to kind of work well with charcoal. And so I have a piece here that of a day laborer, and I like leaving some of these expressive marks, and then finishing the portrait with color. And here are some more recent pieces. So I leave certain things in that charcoal. things that maybe aren't as important to get the message across as getting the portrait in color. So here's another example of a drawing made with charcoal and gouache. And here I used colors here and there just to unify the composition, but mostly to emphasize the facial expression. So this is the last piece in my presentation. But before I end, I just want to thank you all for letting me have the opportunity to talk to you all. Also, I wanted to say thank you all for all the work that you do as art educators. I've taught college for a few years, and my wife is a college professor at El Paso Community College. So I know how much dedication and hard work it takes to really motivate your students. So thank you. I mean, I've personally, it's been a while since I was a student, but I can still remember the words from my professors and all the aha moments that came from critiques. So thank you.